All right. So this is the actual agreement. And again, this is one of the more important parts of the offer that we will be creating. And what this is, as you will be able to tell, is that depending on the place that we're offering, it's either 100, which is for a freehold, meaning a property without a maintenance fee, or if it's Form 101, it means there's maintenance fee. So I'll go through it and I'll highlight the places of the agreement that's more important than the others. So as you can see here, this is the date in which we're going to put the offer into. So this would usually be today's date or a date afterwards, or like a day after, where when you're listening to this. So again, in this case, if I'm representing the buyer, their buyer's name is going to be here, and this is the seller of the property. This is where the address of the property is. So 123 Sample Street, Toronto. And this is where it's facing into east, and then east side of the street. And then this is where the city will be, which city it is. And this is more or less the property dimensions or sizes. And this would be the legal description of the property. And here, this is where we will have the purchase price. Okay, this is where the purchase price is going to be. And then this would be the corresponding word for the amount. The deposit is the amount in which we are going to be giving to the realtor, to the brokerage representing the seller, if this offer does get accepted. The deposit is 100% negotiable. However, there are recommended amounts depending on the property amount. And so we can talk about that if you have any questions. Most of the time, this is filled in because I've discussed to you ahead of time what the deposit will be. This here is the name of the brokerage representing the seller, and this is where we will be addressing the check to, the bank draft to. And then here is the Schedule A. Sometimes there's a Schedule B. Most of the time, I should say, there's a Schedule B. And this is where we'll go through the Schedule A, because the Schedule A is the more important part that trumps over what is in these agreements. So we'll go through that extensively later. And the B normally, I'll explain that as well later, but normally it has to do with the deposit not being earning any interest rates or interest fees. And again, next, if we are the buyer that's submitting the offer, this is the irrevocability, meaning this is where the deadline of the offer is going to be, which is at 10 a.m. on the date in which we choose it to. Normally, we like to put our offers with a few hours of irrevocability, 5, 6, 7 hours, but depending on the situation, this may be a little bit longer. The completion date is a date in which we are going to be moving into the property. So again, this is the move-in date, and by 6 p.m. of that date, the property shall be vacated and the buyer should be able to occupy the place. Completion date. Next, also, this is the time in which all of the down payment that's required for the transaction is required to be given to the lawyer. And usually, the rest of the down payment is given about a week or a week and a half before the completion date. Notices is the email address of the realtor that's representing both parties, the seller and or the buyer. In this case, that's my email address, and this is the email address of the seller's realtor. Here's the shadows. The shadows is very important. What this is this is the part of the house that's not necessarily the house, but it's included in the transactions. So these are things like the appliances and the home systems. So we'll go through them one by one, and just make sure that in your case, what these items should be included into the agreement. And again, this will be differing depending on the property that we have. So most of the time, what's included is the light fixtures, existing window coverings, window blinds, rods, and existing window blinds and rods, the existing stainless steel stove, or if it's not stainless steel, just a stove, with built-in stainless steel microwave with fan. If it's just a hood fan, it would just say wood fan without the microwave. And then the next is existing stainless steel fridge, existing dishwasher, or if it's stainless steel dishwasher, it would say stainless steel dishwasher, existing gas burner and equipment. So this is typically the furnace and or the AC or the electric baseboards. Central air conditioning, so this is the AC system. Clothes washer and dryer. So what this is the washer and dryer, the laundry. All existing mirrors in the bathrooms. Permanent fixtures. So permanent fixtures are things like closet. If there's a walk-in closet and things are drilled into the wall, shelvings are drilled onto the wall, that's a fixture. Towel racks are fixtures. These are all included in the property itself. Anything that's bolted onto and furniture and appliances. If there are any appliances or furniture that we would like to include in here, like shed, additional storage in the back, this is where it will be. So please make sure that all these items are included in your chattels and fixtures. Okay. Next is, and once again, these properties, we want to make sure that these items are deemed free of any encumbrances. What that means is we want to make sure that you don't get a knock 2 months after living into the place, bank saying that the fridge is unpaid or the stove is unpaid. So we want to make sure it's free from any encumbrances. Fixtures excluded. So if there's any fixtures that is in the property, like TV racks or TV wall mount, for example, that the seller would like to take, then it would be placed here. Rental items, most of the time hot water tanks are rental. So this is where we're going to be putting in them. If we're unsure, I would say if applicable. But all the rental items, if let's say the furnace and the AC are rental, this is where we will put them into. HST is included in the purchase price. All right. So the next thing here is the title search. So this is the date which is the lawyer has the time to make sure that the home is not used for any collaterals or does not have any liens on them. Okay. So usually we like to put this a couple of days before the closing date, but industry sometimes suggests that they want to put that a week before. Don't worry if that's the case; it's not a big deal. But we usually like to aim 2 days before the closing date. And again, this is what this home is going to be used for, which is single family residential. The next few clauses in here, these are standard clauses that comes with the agreement. And what we will do is go over the Schedule A because the Schedule A trumps over what these clauses are. So if you scroll down, we're at 29. So this is where you're signing, putting a signature into this agreement. And then this is where the sellers are going to be signing as well. And if we have an approval, this is where the confirmation of acceptance is going to be. Meaning if the seller accepts it or the buyer accepts it, this is where the signatures are going to be placed to. and it will be dated. Once again, these are the information of the different brokerages that's representing both the buyers and the sellers. And again, acknowledgments is afterwards. Once we have an agreed upon accepted offer, then this is where the acknowledgments will be placed. All right. Next is the Schedule A. So the Schedule A is the meat and potatoes of the agreement and offer. And I'll point out the important ones in here as we go along. So, first here is that the buyer agrees to pay the balance of the purchase price subject to adjustments to the seller on completion of this transaction with funds drawn on a lawyer's trust account in the form of bank draft, certified check, or wire transfer using the large value transfer system. What this is saying is that we will be leveraging the services of the lawyer to facilitate the exchange between the seller and the buyer and the bank. And also, what the purchaser is responsible for, they're responsible for possible disbursements, meaning if there are any advance paid land transfer or property taxes, the buyer is committed to pay those. The next here is conditions. So conditions or contingencies are very important to understand. If an offer is conditional, what this simply means is that within those conditional period, if the buyer decides to back out of the deal, the deposit is given back 100%, and there are no it removes the obligation, and you can freely unobligate yourself in purchasing this property. If the offer is non-conditional, meaning if these two conditions are not here, it simply means that the offer is a cash offer, meaning there's no contingencies that are placed into the home. So we'll go over the first one. This offer is conditional upon the buyer arranging at the buyer's own expense a mortgage satisfactory to the buyer in the buyer's sole and absolute discretion, unless the buyer gives notice in writing to the seller personally or in accordance with any other provisions for the delivery of notice of in this agreement of purchase and sale or any schedule thereto within 5 banking days, excluding Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays after acceptance of this offer. This condition is fulfilled. This offer shall be null and void, and the deposit shall be returned to the buyer in full without deduction. This condition is included for the benefit of the buyer and may be waived at the buyer's sole option by notice in writing to the seller as aforesaid within the time period stated herein. So what this means is that if this offer does get accepted, we have 5 banking days to take this agreement of purchase and sale and give it to the bank, and the bank giving us a commitment letter. If for whatever reason, God forbid, that the bank says no, you're not approved, we are welcome to back out of the deal and not proceed, and the deposit is given back to us. If the financing does get approved, what we will do is, well, we will give them a notice of fulfillment, which is a document that says that we are fulfilling this condition and that we are moving forward with this condition. We know that we'll be receiving mortgage or financing for this place. The next here is that this offer is conditional upon the inspection of the subject property by a home inspector at the buyer's own expense and obtaining of a report satisfactory to the buyer in the buyer's sole and absolute discretion, unless the buyers give notice in writing to the seller personally or in accordance with any other provisions for the delivery of notice in this agreement of purchase and sale or any schedule thereto within 5 banking days, excluding Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays after acceptance of this offer. If this condition is fulfilled, this offer shall be null and void, and that the deposit shall be returned to the buyer without deduction. The seller agrees to cooperate in providing access to the property for the purpose of this inspection. This condition is included for the benefit of the buyer and may be waived at the buyer's sole option in notice in writing to the seller as aforesaid within the time period stated herein. So once again, what this means is if our offer does get accepted, we have 5 banking days to bring an inspector in the buyer's expense to inspect the place and for the inspector to give a report on the property. If the report says there are only few minor items and nothing major, and that you as a buyer is willing to go ahead with the home, then this inspection condition can be fulfilled and we'll go ahead with removing the contingencies in this offer, thereby. And then the next possible scenario is that the inspector comes back and says, "Hey, look, there's a $250,000 repair that's required for this property, and we don't feel interested anymore because of the amount of foundational structures or for foundational challenge we require to." Then we can back out of the deal. And again, if that happens, then we get our deposit back 100% free, 100% refunded without any deductions. The third idea is that if, let's say, the inspector comes back and says, "Hey, look, there's some molds in the attic or some leak in the basement, and it would require 5,000 or $4,000 worth of work in here," then what we can do is renegotiate the terms, either ask for a price reduction or ask the sellers to remediate these concerns, and then we'll proceed. So there's three options: accept the home, reject the home, or renegotiate the price and the terms before moving forward. And once again, in these two ideas, if you do choose to back out of these deal during a conditional period, the deposit is safe and that you're able to receive it back. Okay. All right. So these two are very important. If you have any other questions about this, feel free to ask me the question. Next is the seller warrants that the lands are free and clear of any local improvement charges and that they will be free and clear of local improvement charges on completion, that the seller does not receive any notification of future local improvement charges for the property. If local improvement charges are not paid as a completion, they will be adjusted as a benefit to the buyer on completion. What this simply means is we want to make sure that the sellers did not receive any notification from the city saying that there's some improvements to be completed. And if they did receive it, they should intend to let us know. And if there are any charges, the sellers should be the one that will be taking care of them. Again, if the area that we're considering is fairly older and it's been more established, what this simply means is that the chances of having local improvements is usually slim to none. But again, we just want to make sure that the sellers did not receive any notification for any improvements, and that you as a buyer is not hooked for these improvements. Next is the seller represents and warrants that during the time the seller has owned the property, the use of the property and the buildings and structures thereon has not been for any criminal use, including the growth or manufacture of any illegal substances, and to the best of the seller's knowledge and belief that the use of the property and the buildings and structures thereon has never for any criminal use or activity and the growth or manufacture of illegal substances. This warranty shall survive and not merge in the completion of this transaction. We just want to make sure that the home is not being used for any illegal activities. We're saying that the seller is agreeing and warranting that. The next is the seller hereby represents and warrants to the best of his or her knowledge that there's been no deaths, suicides, murders on the said property at any time. These warranties shall survive at the time of closing this transaction, but shall only apply to circumstances at or before closing date. So, which means that we want to make sure that there's been no deaths or suicides on the properties, that if they were, they should disclose it to us ahead of time. Next is the buyer shall have the right to visit the property three further times for measurements, estimates from contractors, not including appraisers, prior to closing. At the time chosen by the buyer with 24 hours notice, the seller agrees to provide access to the property for the purposes of the visit. So what this simply means is that we have three further times to visit the property to do any measurement, estimates, and final buyer visits. And industry standard is two. If they come back to us and say you can only do a visit two times, no worries, it's no problem. Next, in addition to any provisions contained in this agreement, the seller agrees to provide access to the property to the buyer or anyone designated by the buyer for the purposes of inspection, appraisal, insurance inspection at the time chosen by the buyer by 24-hour notice. So, if let's say the bank requires to do an appraisal for the property in order for you to receive financing, the sellers should be able to allow us to do this. Next is the seller warrants that the furnace and central air conditioning unit are owned and not leased. In the event the furnace or air conditioning unit are leased, the seller at their own expense agrees to purchase them and shall have them fully owned 1 week before the title search date. So, if let's say the furnace and the AC are rental, sorry, this means that first and foremost that the furnace and the AC or any appliances that we put in here, like hot water tank, water softener, is owned and not leased. So we want to ensure that because we want to make sure that this home is paid. This home's heating and cooling system is paid before we go into there, unless otherwise we uh, agree another terms for the AC and furnace. In the event that the furnace or the AC are leased, if it was leased indeed, the seller agrees to purchase them 1 week before the title search date. Next is the seller represents and warrants that the chattels and fixtures as included in this agreement of purchase and sale will be in good working order and free from any liens and encumbrances on completion. The parties agree that the representation and warranty shall survive and not merge in completion of this transaction, but apply only to the state or the property at completion of this transaction. So, what this means is we want to make sure that the chattels and the fixtures um, in this agreement of purchase and sale is that it's a good working order. So we want to make sure that by the time we're going to occupy this place, that all the appliances and systems are in good working order. They can't just start to destroy the appliances or not take care of them because the property's been sold. So they have to take care of it. Next is that the seller warrants, oh, and also, by the way, before moving on, it's also important that these shadows and fixtures are free from any liens and encumbrances. Next is the seller warrants that all mechanical, electrical, heating, ventilation, AC systems, and all other equipment in the real property shall be good working order on completion. The parties agreed and warrants that the warranty shall survive and not merge in completion of this transaction, but apply only to those circumstances existing at the completion of this transaction. So all these systems, mechanical, electrical, heating, ventilation, AC, has to be in good working order. It has to be good working order. Otherwise, they most of the time we will inspect them, or all of the time we will do a pre-closing or final buyer visit in order to make sure that all these items are fixed. If not, they gotta fix it before you moving into the place. Next is the seller agrees to provide the buyer within 5 banking days of acceptance of this offer the copy of existing survey if available. So again, a survey, if they have it, they should share it to us. If they don't have it, that's okay. Our lawyer is able to figure that part out. Next is the parties acknowledge and agree that all closing documentation can be signed electronically and forwarded by email or fax in accordance with the Electronic Commerce Act. So again, just making sure that we can use leverage e-signatures when it comes to signing these documents. The next is the parties agree that the keys to the property shall be left in a lockbox at the time at the property, and the code to the same is to be provided to the buyers in escrow pending closing of this transaction. So what this means is that this keys has to be, if let's say it's not going to be switched or done an exchange in person via lawyers, that they provide a lockbox to us, and that at the time of closing, what's going to be completed or considered completed closing, they would give you the code to the lockbox. And lastly, the buyer shall have the right at any time prior to closing to change the buyer's name or add another buyer and deliver the amendment of agreement of purchase and sale of such change to the seller, and the seller agrees to sign the amendment of agreement of purchase and sale. Notwithstanding this agreement amendment, the original buyers are not released from their obligation under the agreement of purchase and sale, shall remain jointly severally liable with the new buyer under agreement. So what this means is that at any time, we should be able to add a buyer into the transaction if we choose to do so. Okay. Once again, the reason we're putting this is that let's say right now, for the purpose of submitting an offer quickly, that we only put one buyer. But later on, obviously, if there are multiple buyers, we'll be adding them onto the agreement of purchase and sale. And they should allow us as per this clause. So that's it. That's the Form 100 with the Schedule A. If you have any questions, let me know about that. So lastly, we'll discuss the Schedule B. So the Schedule B is very simple, whereby most of the time, unless there's something that's specific, most of the time, it is to say that the deposit that we're giving to the brokerage representing the seller, we're not allowing asking them to put it in any investments, because if we put it into investments, there's going to be fees involved. So we're agreeing that we're not taking part into that. And that's it. If you have any questions, do let me know. And if you're ready to sign, go over to your email and start to authenticate or DocuSign the forms.